Okay, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Bert Kloeze. I'm Deputy Director General of Statistics Netherlands and chair of the UN Committee, UNSCIA, for the SIA, the System of Environmental Economic Accounts. And as you may know, the Global Biodiversity Framework, GBF, and its monitoring framework is being developed for adoption at the Conference of Parties to the CBD, the Convention of Biological Diversity, later this year. In order to foster collaboration between national statistical offices, parties to the CBD, and experts in the biological sciences, CBD, the European Union, and UNSD are organizing this event. The role of the national statistical agencies in biodiversity monitoring will be discussed, and cutting-edge issues on data and statistics in the field. Discussion today will contribute to the discussion for the relevant agenda item for the upcoming UN Statistical Commission. The event brings together many friends and colleagues with strong interest in the global biodiversity framework to foster collaboration and to discuss the way forward. Today, you will hear presentations from high-level representatives from CBD and the official statistical community to provide you with an update in these fields. Following the presentations, there will be a panel discussion with representatives of the CBD parties, national statistical agencies, and expert communities on the current status, data gaps, and way forward to an improved national data system for biodiversity monitoring. At the end of these events, there will be some room for an open discussion. Before we start, some housekeeping announcements. The meeting will be recorded, and you'll be able to find the recording on the website of the United Nations Statistical Commission. And if you wish to ask a question, please put a message in the chat. The organizer will monitor the chat and bring pertinent questions into the discussion during the discussion session. And if you're having any technical problems with Zoom or with technology for the meeting, please put a message in the chat. We have UNSD colleague Elsa Benje, who can provide support online. With this, I give the floor to Mr. David Cooper, Deputy Executive Secretary of the CBD Secretariat. Mr. Cooper.
Thank you very much, Bert, and we're very happy to be here. I'm representing Elizabeth Maremma, the Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, and many of my colleagues from the Convention are joining us too. This event on the margins of the 53rd sessions of the UN Statistical Commission, it's really a good opportunity, as you just said, to bring these worlds together to make sure that as we go forward in developing the post-2020 framework, we have the full engagement and support of the UN statistical community and the national statistical agencies. As we all know, we're facing a major series of crises with biodiversity loss, climate change, the health crisis. We know that the loss of biodiversity threatens not only SDGs 14 and 15, those that are focused specifically on biodiversity, but in fact, it risks to jeopardize the achievement of all of the Sustainable Development Goals. We, as you've just mentioned, the CBD community is in the process of developing the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, an outcome-oriented framework with a series of goals and targets that is, of course, intended to address this crisis. And key to the success of that framework will be having good indicators and indicators that can be looked at not only at the global level, but at the national level to guide action towards those goals and targets. In fact, one of the changes that we're seeing in the discussions, in the negotiations, and I'm sure my colleagues, the co-chairs, will say more about this, is a bigger emphasis than we had in the earlier CBD plans on monitoring, on transparency, on ensuring that we have a way of knowing whether we are on track to achieving these goals and targets, knowing a way that we can monitor progress towards them. And above all, I want to emphasize the importance of national statistical agencies in helping in this effort, but also more importantly, perhaps, to make sure that efforts towards these biodiversity goals are well linked in the entire national machinery, the government machinery. So we have actually just coming up next month in Geneva, a series of meetings preparing for the post-2020 framework, bringing together, among others, the working group on the post-2020 framework. You'll hear from the co-chairs, and the Substa, our scientific body. You'll hear from the chair too. Looking at developing this monitoring framework further, and a key aspect of that how it will link to the SDGs. So far, in fact, in the earlier discussions, the draft language that we have invites the UN Statistical Commission to support the operationalization of the monitoring framework for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And it indicates that the indicators for monitoring the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals and other frameworks for official statistics, including the UN framework for the development of environmental statistics and the UN system of environment economic accounts, should be drawn upon, and the new framework should be aligned with this. So I come to you from the perspective of the convention to say that we really need this collaboration between the biodiversity experts, the parties to the convention, and the UN and national statistical communities, to ensure that we put in place a robust framework and to be sure that we can this time meet our goals and targets, develop and implement a biodiversity framework that addresses these major challenges and helps us, in fact, together to underpin progress towards the 2030 agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm sure that my colleagues, Basil, Francis, and Ezekiel, will provide some more information on the framework, the vision, the goals, and the targets. And I thank you all, Bert, Stefan from the Statistics Commission, and all of those who are joining this discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. I think it's an invitation we gladly accept as statisticians. We like to make our data and frameworks as useful as possible, and in helping this monitoring of these biodiversity goals, I think we gladly cooperate with CBD. So now we go to an overview of the biodiversity framework and the national reporting mechanism. And I've got two presenters here. Mr. Bessel from Havre, co-chair of the CBD open-ended working group on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and Mr. Ezekiel Benitez Diaz, chair of the subsidiary body on scientific, technical, and technological advice of CBD. And I think we start with Basil first. So the floor is yours.
Good day, and thank you for having me. I come in a very, very good spot in between David and Ezekiel, and I'll try to make the links between the two presentations. I was asked to talk to you a little bit about the GBF and starting for why should you care about the GBF? Why should you as citizens, or not only as statisticians? You heard many times about the challenge we are facing with climate change. You heard a lot about health, whether you like it or not. Perhaps you have heard a little bit less about the challenge of the loss of biodiversity, but 1/3 of our economy is linked to that, and many aspects of our health and well-being are linked to a healthy and resilient nature. This is why the CBD is there, and the CBD works with that system of global biodiversity frameworks that sets goals for every 10 years period. And at the end of the last cycle, there was a diagnostic that was done, and we were asked, Francis and I, to shepherd the parties into the negotiation of the next cycle. And that cycle is going to be different. It's going to be different in several ways, and I want to highlight 3 of those for you. One is there is a determination by the parties to have a more robust system for planning, reporting, and review. That means that they both want to be able to see how they're making change, but also to be able to communicate widely what they're doing, and also to make course correction. So there is that fundamental characteristic. Another one is that the previous frameworks were basically seen as a framework for ministers for the environment. And we want to make this framework, the new one, a framework for all. So that means for the whole of government, including finance ministry, including statistical agencies, but also whole of society, including industry and subnational government. So that means that we need to create a system for reporting and performance that is open, that is easily integrable with the system that will exist on its time. So that's another aspect that is going to be important. There is also a very important aspect of integration, what we call synergies, and David has talked about the notion, the links to the SDGs, which is one aspect in which the frameworks is linked with other agreements, be it climate, the chemical convention, agreement being discussed now under pandemics, under WHO. So the key message here is that we don't want to create a framework in isolation. We want to create one that that is linked, and that means that we need to have this integration of performance management system. Coming back to the challenge, and I'm very interested and I'm looking forward to hear the conversation. It's a great thing to meet the new communities, and I'll go one step further than David. We not only welcome you, our success is critical on your engagement. So they're not going to be a success in terms of if we're working apart. So we definitively need to work with you. I think we're working very well together. And I think we're now seeing for the first time this integration of the classic, what we call our classical monitoring data. Francis, a little bit later, will talk about monitoring in his country, in Uganda. I can talk at length about monitoring in my country, which is how the biology community is gathering data. And what we need is now harnessing the power of your data from the statistical agency. I've been amazed at how your field has been evolving over the last few years, and the power of the data that you have access to. We're going to need your help in terms of understanding how we can use that data and how can we make our system better. And perhaps we can show you a little bit more about what we do in terms of monitoring within the biodiversity. So I hope Bert, that I'm answering the question you asked me, and I'll be delighted to hear the conversation and help if there is any questions. So back to you, Bert.
Thank you. And again, we gladly cooperate, and we think also that using standards and our data can really contribute, and it's also our role to do this. So we're very happy with this collaboration. Also, our people told us too. So Ezequiel, can I give the floor to you?
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. As both Basil, the Open-Ended Working Group co-chair, and David, on behalf of the Executive Secretary of the Convention, have elaborated, the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework is a critical step toward developing the global response to prevent ecosystem collapse and biodiversity loss. Basil outlined how the language of the framework is being developed by the parties for adoption at the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties in Kunming. I would like to elaborate the situation in terms of the monitoring biodiversity and the proposed way forward for monitoring the global biodiversity framework. In the case of the last strategic plan for biodiversity, commonly referred as the Aichi, the Aichi targets were not accompanied by a dedicated set of metrics for targeting interventions, assessing progress, and guiding policy. A biodiversity indicators partnership, BIP, was established much after the adoption of the framework to develop a monitoring system. The monitoring of Aichi targets represent a step forward in terms of improving global analysis and biodiversity data. However, monitoring of Aichi relied mostly on data from the global data providers, including in some cases, data which could not be disaggregated to the national level. In the context of the post-2020 framework, parties have recognized that better monitoring and use of biodiversity data to guide action is critical to the success of this framework. This includes not only for tracking global progress, but also for guiding national decision-making and national biodiversity planning. As such, current draft monitoring framework includes a set of headline indicators, which are meant to serve as a minimum set of high-level indicators for capturing the overall scope of the goals and targets on the post-2020 framework, and which are suitable for tracking both national and global progress towards them. The monitoring framework also includes more detailed component and complementary indicators for tracking progress at specific levels or on specific biodiversity topics. In terms of tracking national progress, the headline indicators are suggested to be included in the national reporting template under the convention and for national biodiversity strategies and action plan monitoring. Note that national reporting is a legal obligation of countries which are party to the convention. To ensure the relevance and ability of global aggregated these indicators, there is a need to ensure that the indicators are based on agreed global methodologies. For example, for some indicators, there is a direct link to global statistical methodologies which have been developed under the UN Statistical Commission. Moving towards improved national monitoring of biodiversity will not happen overnight. In order to build national systems which are able to provide data relevant for monitoring biodiversity, the links between biodiversity and social development, the links between the biodiversity and the economy will require collaboration across sectors, particularly collaboration with national statistical offices and geospatial entities. Additionally, to ensure that this data is used across government, including in national development planning and SDGs implementation, also depends on collaboration and improved awareness of the role that biodiversity and the planetary health plays as a foundation for development, including for food systems, climate mitigation, air, water and soil purification, human health and livelihoods, and economic development. We see discussions such as this one today as a starting point for improving coordination across our communities. The UN Statistical Commission has already recognized the importance of biodiversity through the adoption of the System of Environmental Economic Account, the SEA, which includes ecosystem accounts and the endorsement of the framework of the development of environment statistics. Now is the time to ensure that we support on the group to operationalize the better environmental monitoring and support the monitoring of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. I would like to thank the UN Statistical Division for inviting me and my colleagues to be here today. And I would like to thank all of you for joining. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ezekiel. And indeed, we value the cooperation, and this will not be the last meeting on the topic. It's very important. So the next point on the agenda is that I will talk from the statistical side a little bit and give a short presentation. So Julian or Elsa, can you put my presentation on? Yes. So what I will tell is what is the SIA and its links to the post-2020 GBF monitoring framework. Obviously, in 10 minutes, can only say some little words, but there's more on the UN website and in the links provided in the presentation. So next sheet, please. So why did we statisticians develop the environmental economic accounts? Well, the basic idea is that our economy and well-being crucially depends on nature, and that headline indicators like GDP do not capture that. They're mostly about economics. And as a result, the decision makers don't have access to key information necessary to effectively pursue sustainable development that doesn't harm nature too much for future generations. Well, the system of environmental economic accounts was developed to fill that gap. It integrates information on the economy and the environment, showing the interrelationship complementing the system of national accounts. And the idea is here that the economic information that we're all used to, like GDP, can be linked to environmental information. So exactly the relation is described well, and decisions can be made on that. Next sheet, please. So what is the SIA? Basically, it consists of two parts. One is the central framework. It has been adopted in 2013. And this is about environmental assets like water, timber, energy, stocks and flows. It's about environmental industries, subsidies, and many more. And this has been in place for a while now. Last year, we had a major breakthrough. The Statistical Commission adopted the ecosystem accounting, the second part of the SIA. And here we don't look at the environmental assets separately, but we look at the ecosystems and see what contributions they have to our economy and what are the links. And basically, the extent and the conditions of ecosystems are described, but also the services they provide to the economy in physical and in value monetary terms. At present, or I must say 2020, we had a survey as real statisticians, we measured that. So 89 countries were then implementing the central framework. 34 countries compiled the ecosystem accounts, so before the official adoption, and 27 countries at the time were planning to start implementation of the SIA. So next slide, please. So as was said in presentations before, the UN Statistical Commission asked us as a UN SIA committee after the adoption also to ensure that it's used because the idea of standards is that it's used in global policy initiatives. So the UN Statistical Commission welcomed the progress of the committee in mainstreaming the use of the SIA in policy in areas like climate change, circular economy, sustainable finance, and biodiversity policy, and particularly encouraged the committee to engage in the monitoring framework of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Agenda and participate in the proposed expert group under the auspices of the Secretariat of CBD to provide the connection between biodiversity and official statistical communities. So actually, as a UNCA committee, we've got a task, a role to engage with CBD and the working group to ensure that CF could be used there. Next sheet. So the subsidiary body that Ezekiel we just heard is chairing recognized the value of aligning national monitoring with the UN system of SIA, statistical standards, in order to mainstream biodiversity and national statistical systems and to strengthen national information and monitor systems and reporting. And this is obviously good. And David, Bessel, and Ezekiel just mentioned that also. And additionally, there will be an ad hoc technical expert group to advise on the further optimization of the monitoring framework for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. As was said before, good monitoring, good seeing how far you are to the targets on a global and national level is important. And SIA is proposed as a methodological basis for several headline indicators in the provisional monitoring framework. So if we go to the next slide. Here are 2 goals and 4 targets where SIA can inform the indicators. Under goal A, the indicator extent of selected natural and modified ecosystems. Under goal B, national environmental economic accounts of ecosystem services, so ensure that the contribution of the environment to the economy is taken into account. Under target 9, national environmental economic accounts of benefits from the use of wild species. Target 11, national environmental economic accounts of regulation of air quality, quality and quantity of water, and protection from hazards and extreme events for all people from ecosystems. And target 14, integration of biodiversity into national accounting and reporting systems, defined as implementation of SIA. For these goals and targets, SIA already has been proposed. For target 19, not yet, but SIA could also inform that. Public expenditure and private expenditure on conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and ecosystems. So the indicator working group under the UNSCA is tasked with the development of metadata sheets on these indicators. So a lot of people are working hard to define these indicators in a good way, because it's so important. By using SIA, you know you've got a well-defined standard, and if you base indicators on that, well, the indicators are well-defined, and it's also comparable over time and over countries. But then also the indicators need to be defined well, and this is what the indicator working group is doing. So next slide. So in order to assist implementation of ecosystem accounting, the committee has worked on guidelines. The guidelines on biophysical modeling are there. They can be found on the internet. The guidelines evaluation are nearly finished, and both guidelines will help in a very practical way to implement the ecosystem account, and by that helping to inform the monitoring framework of CBD. And also the committee provide tools to jumpstart accounts compilation, make it easier, for example, by a tool called ARIAS. I'll come back to that later. So next slide. This is an example, goal A monitoring, the extent of selected national and modified ecosystems. We see here a map of Brazil made by IBGE, the Statistical Office of Brazil, in which the ecosystems are mapped and classified according to the ecosystem accounting classification. And by following this in time and comparing it between countries, well, this particular indicator can be informed. Next slide, please. This is another example. This is from KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. And this is on the contribution of ecosystems to the economy. So the services. On the left of the slide, you see a number of services that ecosystems can provide. The provision of woods, other products, livestock, crop production, but also things like carbon storage, pollination, flow regulation, fluid attenuation. So all kinds of things that the ecosystem do for the economy and that are important to take into account making decisions for policymakers. And in the columns, you see the different ecosystems, and here you can see what ecosystems really contribute what services. And here they're measured in physical terms. Obviously, the advantage is that it's much easier to define. If you do it in monetary terms, you can add them up, but obviously there has to be some things to be involved to be able to translate this into monetary terms. So this is an example how goal B could be informed. Next slide, please. So, as was said before, the data indicators will be collected by national authorities. This is the same for the Sustainable Development Goals. And whenever national data is not available, data will be estimated through global data platforms and mechanisms endorsed by the UN Statistical Commission. But then it's important that countries recognize the data about themselves. So global estimated data will be sent to national authorities for validation. And this ensures that if there's data nationally, it will be used. And by using tools like ARIAS, there will be more data nationally, but whenever it's not there, it can be estimated globally and distributed to the countries for validation. Next slide, please. So what is ARIES? I already mentioned that. ARIES is an open data platform. There's a lot of data there, specifically satellite data. And it's not only data, it's also a lot of artificial intelligence algorithms readily made available that make it possible for any region of the world to estimate the ecosystem accounts and maps. And it's an interoperable website and platform, so you can bring your own data, your own artificial intelligence algorithms. And the idea is that this will greatly help to facilitate creating environmental accounts, the ecosystem accounts. And there's more information in the link here. Last sheet. So the conclusion, well, the recognition of the role of national statistical systems and the role of SIA as an important statistical framework in support of the monitoring framework, and indicates therein provides a unique opportunity for the official statistical community to help shape the monitoring framework and develop nationally owned statistical information, which is mainstreamed within the national statistical system. As was said by David, Bessel and his CQO, really feel welcome and really want to take up the task to bring our knowledge about standards and statistics in this important policy area. And a lot of effort has already been made to align the proposed headline indicators in the monitoring framework for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework with the statistical frameworks developed under the UN Statistical Commission, among them SIA, but it's not the only one. And guidelines and tools are developed to facilitate accounts compilation to improve national data systems for biodiversity monitoring. So last slide. Right. This brings me to the end of the overview. Obviously, in 10 minutes, you cannot say everything, but the whole idea is that, well, there's something there, the ecosystem accounts. It can be used for informing the monitoring framework. And we're doing a lot of statisticians to work together with CBD and other experts to make that happen. So thank you. And as a chair, I can give the work back to myself, so I'll do that. But now we're going to the panel discussion, and I'm very happy that Ms. Ann Teller from the European Commission will chair that panel discussion, because in this panel discussion, we'll hear from experts from the CBD, the statistical world, and experts on biology, how they look at all the things that has been said thus far. So, Anne, can I give the floor to you?
Sorry, I think I have a problem with my camera, but okay. This morning was a difficult IT morning, but okay. Nevertheless, I'll start. Hopefully, it will be sorted out while I'm talking. So yes, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this meeting and to this very interesting panel discussion that we will have. Okay, coming. Thank you. Sorry for this. We have a very interesting group of panelists with different backgrounds, so I hope it will provide different facets of the issue. But before I start asking some questions to the panelists, as a matter of introduction, I would like to say that personally, I've been involved in knowledge to support biodiversity policy in EU and globally. And that means a very close relation between scientists, people on the ground who are measuring biodiversity, but also statisticians and researchers. And it's not always easy to have these different communities working together because they have different approaches. But I think that the future is really to learn from each other and to reinforce our strengths, instead of arguing against each other. So what I learned, and I can only share my experience through time, is that the biodiversity community is very good in measuring biodiversity on the ground, in also investigating whether remote sensing or artificial intelligence techniques could be used. But these are really data, observation, and so, and this community is less good, and it's a kind of self-criticism in making these data standardized, statistically robust, in a format also that can be where there is no double counting. Now, the statisticians can do that, and they do that very well. But when they do it without much synergies with the biodiversity community, you sometimes end up with some indicators which are not as policy relevant as the biodiversity community would like to. So therefore, I think that if we join forces, we can really make a big improvement. And at least that's what we are committed to in the European Union. We are working now on the amendment of a regulation on environmental economic account, introducing a new module on ecosystem accounting, where the member states will have to report on ecosystem extent, but also ecosystem condition, which is a very important one for the biodiversity community, and ecosystem services. And this will be done essentially in biophysical terms. And that's another point that I would like to raise before we start the discussion, is that when we say natural capital accounting, ecosystem accounting, economic accounts, immediately, most of my colleagues think of euros, dollars, And in fact, it's hardly so, because the ecosystem accounting handbook, which has been adopted last March, and we are very, very happy with it, is hardly about monetary values. It's mainly about biophysical standards and definitions and so. And so with all this, I hope, and I'm very, very happy that the CBD and the Secretariat in particular is promoting the work of the statisticians in the CBD context, and hopefully that we will work hand in hand. So sorry for this long introduction, but now I would like to give the floor to Francis. I hope Francis Ockvalt is with us. He's the co-chair of the open-ended working group with Basil Van Avre, and he's also very committed in biodiversity policy in his country, Uganda. So Francis, are you there?
I think he's having trouble connecting and I haven't been able to reach him. Yeah, sorry.
Should we start with the second one then, with Maria Cecilia, because the time is short?
Yes.
So Maria, are you there? Yes, Maria is there.
Yes.
So thank you very much for jumping in, and sorry for this, but we have a very tight schedule. So Maria, you are from the group on Earth observations, Biodiversity Network, more known as Geobone. And so in this context, I would like to ask you, I mean, Geobone has been supporting the CBD for a long time now, and especially on the development of global indicators and essential biodiversity variables for it. So now the question is, how this work, which has been very much based on globally developed indicators, could somehow now move to national, to improve the national indicators and national monitoring. And especially, as you know, there is a big demand from parties to have national indicators to be added up to make global indicators. So that's easy to say, but that's not easy to do, as well as going from global and disaggregate at national level while making sense at national level. So could you share your experience? Thank you.
Sure, thank you for the invitation. I have here 2 slides I'm going to share.
Yeah, I forgot to say that you have just a few minutes as all the others, so thank you.
Yes. Are you seeing my presentation?
Yes, we do.
Yes, okay,
yes.
Great, thank you. Okay, yes, that is a key question, the transition from national to global and from global to national. And in fact, Geobone has worked over the last decade on this topic, building what we call the biodiversity observation networks. And this is a way to establish that links in a two-way flow for information from global to national and from national to global. We call this the top-down, bottom-up approach, and we focus on two aspects on this transition, let's say. One are the technical aspects relating to that upscale and downscale of data and information, and that includes building and maintaining the data and information infrastructure for trend detection and attribution of causes for those trends with biodiversity model. So the first one are those technical aspects in the delivery of the information at the different scales through biodiversity informatic infrastructures, so that information and data can flow, and the models can be built and the calculations can be done. We believe that research centers, national and regional research centers, are key on that role of that technical aspects of the information flow. Now, the other aspect of this transition is to really deliver the information at the different scales that the information is needed. So this is key because national information system must respond to what they need to act at the national and the subnational scales. So really, we believe that the monitoring framework of the GBF needs to take into account that information needs, what information is used and needed for planning the actions at the national and the subnational level, and how can that information can be aggregated to produce the global indicators. So if I make myself clear, there are two things. One is those technical aspects of moving and producing the information and producing the indicators. And the other aspect is more understanding the needs at the different scales and integrating that needs. For that, the essential biodiversity variables concept that Geobone has been developed is really important, because that is like the first level of abstraction of the information from raw data to a variable that can then be used into the indicators. And those essential variables could be the same at different scales. And we have been working this at local, national, and global scales. And the variables are used, for example, in indicators like the species habitat index. That is one of the headline indicators. Now, in this figure I'm showing, we have this idea where in the center, we have the planning actions, the information needs at the different scales, and how through the different indicators that should be also used not just for reporting the progress on a goal, but on guiding actions and planning, should be aggregated the data to track on those global indicators. Now, we see this like a feedback loop. So the role of the global data products in ensuring there is available data across the globe is essential, both for countries that have good information system and for those that don't have enough data. And when I talk about information products, I am not talking about just the indicators product, but also on the data products that underpin them. For example, global land cover maps, global species distributions data, global primary productivity maps, global climate information. These global products get better as they have more updated data representing different global conditions that are used for calibration and validations of the models. So they need national data. So global information products and national information systems can be thought as that feedback loop. And as a country, I use a global product, but the quality of that product at the national level will depend on the data that underpins the products that represent the characteristics of my country. and that global data producers know that the more diverse the data they have in there, the better the global product they are going to deliver. So that needs to be have in mind, and that feedback loop needs to get into operation so that we can have that transition. The Geobone has been working supporting all this development of indicators and on the workflows from the data, building the EBBs to the indicators, and how this can be done at the different scales. We have been providing webinars and info documents about these subjects, and we also have been working on analysis of the overall GBF, seeing the interlinkages between the different targets and goals. And here in that info documents 31, we explain the importance of the monitoring process, not just for assessing the progress towards a target and goal, but also for planning and guiding actions. And we explain some of the topics of this top-down, bottom-up approach.
Can you finish?
Yes, I'm going to finish. We work together with a lot of other experts on this topic, and Geobone is totally committed to supporting both the CBD Secretariat and the parties in providing information for the negotiation process and following up with the supporting implementation of the monitoring framework.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very short explanation, but I think it was very clear. Is Francis connected, or should we go to Greg Peterson? Gillian? Do you know if Francis is connected?
I think he's not going to be able to connect, so we
go on. Okay, sorry for this.
Today, sorry.
Would have been very good to hear Francis, who is a key person in the CBD Global Biodiversity Framework context, but let's go now to Greg Peterson from Canada. So Greg, now if we go from global to national, if I may say so, on the need for national data, that is a clear constraint. How do you see the role of national statistics offices in biodiversity monitoring, accounting, whatever you call it, frameworks, and the role that national statistical offices could play in developing these national data management systems, so that they would really help the robustness, the relevance of the data that we will need for monitoring progress on the global biodiversity framework and also at national level. So Greg, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anne, and hello, everybody. Anne, I think you really framed the question really well in your opening remarks when you said that coming up with a way of monitoring biodiversity essentially is a team sport, right? It's not necessarily just the purview of national statistical offices, nor necessarily the purview of physical scientists, but it's going to essentially this is a team sport that requires the integration of all of this together. And I think this is where national statistical offices can really add value to the system. By design, national statistical offices are integrators of information. And if we take a look at SIA, the way that Bert described it in his remarks, initially we developed SIA, the SIA Central Framework, recognizing that we needed to better understand the relationship between the environment and the economy. And as we move towards the sort of ecosystem accounting, that just kind of amplifies that need. And if we take a look at how we are revising the system of national accounts, we're in the process of revising the S&A standard for 2025. that also recognizes the need to draw a stronger link between the measurement of the economy and the measurement of the environment. National statistical offices, although traditionally we're seen as holders of a lot of socioeconomic data, and I know within our organization we sit on about 5 petabytes of socioeconomic data. We still play, I think, a useful role as an integrator. And biodiversity assembling biodiversity data is no different. That said, I think we have to be kind of honest with ourselves and recognize that national statistical offices have a shorter history of working with biodiversity data as opposed to social and economic data. But I think the basic principles of assembling kind of official statistics remain the same. However different the units of measure that we're looking at in terms of ecosystem accounting, we're still relying on the best internationally accepted standards and frameworks to assemble this data. We apply the same data quality principles as those presented in the fundamental principles for official statistics. And national statistical offices play a role as of a neutral, apolitical data broker. And if I think about how we do things in Statistics Canada, specifically in our environment statistics program, we apply these principles by working very closely with all sorts of data providers, from government to academia to environmental groups, to assemble and build on the best possible ecological information available, not just using the 5 petabytes of data that we're holding on to, but integrating the data with the data holdings of others. And by doing so, we try to make sure that we provide data that will guide crucial decisions by policymakers, by businesses, by Indigenous and other communities. So again, I think the role of NSOs, National Statistical Offices, is to draw things together in a coherent way, data from different sources that allow for comparability over space and time and maximize their analytical potential. So in general, I guess philosophically, that's how I see the role of NSOs. Within Statistics Canada, we've been, we're trying to sort of move down this path. We've recently launched a census of the environment. Like a census of population, the census of environment, the objective is to enumerate all of Canada's ecosystems. We want to develop a open, coherent, integrated, interoperable sort of database of ecosystems and their services. Doing so, again, thinking about your theme of partnership, and it relies on a close partnership with data providers, collaborators, and users. The idea here is, as Bert described, enumerate all of Canada's ecosystems, the condition of those ecosystems, the extent of those ecosystems, and the goods and services derived from those ecosystems. But more importantly, treat this as a register that allows us to then integrate that data in a geospatial way to other social and economic data holdings that we have. So it becomes a tool for sort of environmental risk assessments. It provides a tool for environmental impact assessments. And kind of builds in notions of ecological biodiversity into decision-making that doesn't just touch on environmental policy, but also on economic and social policy. Maybe in interest of time, and I'll leave it at that. I can't reinforce enough that I think that the key role that national statistical offices play is that role of kind of honest broker, that integrator of information, working, of course, in partnership with kind of the scientific and environmental communities in order to provide that important value add.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you very much for this very interesting intervention, and also for emphasizing the role of spatial data, because as you know, traditional statistics are most of the time perceived as figures in tables, and of course for all the policies related to land and sea, we need to have a strong spatial dimension to the data that we use. So with this, I will now go to the next speaker. Thank you again, Greg, who is Vivian Ilarina. She is from the Philippine Statistical Authority. And of course, all the needs for putting in place a strong monitoring framework for the global biodiversity framework raises also a lot of challenges. and challenges, especially also for developing countries. And therefore, we would be very interested in if you could share your thought about how to strengthen the role of national statistical offices to improve national data systems for biodiversity policy monitoring. So Vivian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So in the Philippines Statistics Authority, by law through the Republic Act 10625 or the Philippine Statistics Act, mandates the agency to be the overall coordinator of the entire Philippine statistical system. So here we have the Philippine Statistical Authority Board, which is the highest policy-making body on statistical matters, and all the legal frameworks are already in place within the Philippine statistical system, including the institutional framework. But these two frameworks are not enough, no? The major challenge that we have encountered is to, I prepared slides, no? Okay, so I will start with my slides. So in terms of the efforts of the Philippines on implementing the system of environment and economic accounting, so we started way back 1991, and right now we are active on this. And presently, we have some initiative in terms of developing the biodiversity. First, we have, next slide, please. We have the, So we are moving towards developing an action plan, or also the natural capital accounting roadmap. This is where we just to look at where we are now and how do we get there and where do we want to go. So on the next slide, we have the existing environment economic accounting for evidence-based policy. This is a project between the UNSD and the PSA, and this mainly to address technical and institutional barriers for the establishment of the environmental account. So next slide. In this project, we are highlighting on the action plan for environment and economic accounts, and also we'll start on the land accounts and the land ecosystem extent accounts using the ARIS. This is a tool which stands for Artificial Intelligence for Environment and Sustainability tool. Next slide. We are also involved towards there's a prelude trying to look at biodiversity. We are now into assessing data towards the biodiversity account, but we have also done the mangrove ecosystem accounts. Next slide. We are also participating in the UNDP steering committee, which is the BioFin, and right now we have also the Philippine Sustainable Interventions for Biodiversity, Ocean and Landscape, CIBOL, which is a project under the Environment and Natural Resources. Next slide. So the big challenge that we have encountered while we started developing the environmental accounts and also moving towards ecosystem accounts, like any other global frameworks that we are maintaining, is how to build that strong partnership and collaboration among the various stakeholders. When we say stakeholders, these are the users of the statistics, they are the producers, and also the compilers, including the community, like international partners, our non-government institutions, and academe. Next slide. And how do we address them? We have the very strong coordination mechanism. One among them is the interagency committees, technical working groups, and task forces. We have a total of like 24 committees, statistical committees under the Philippine Statistics Authority. We have also the Philippine Statistical Development Program that outlines what are those statistical programs, statistical activities that we need to develop, implement within the planned period of the president. Our new administration by May, we have a new president, so we will be like changing again whether there are some modifications in terms of our plans statistical. Third is we are partnering, of course, with international agencies. We call for these partners, specifically, for example, assistance on trying to develop the framework, the operational framework. What are the indicators, the statistics that has to go with this? Next slide. Of course, it is one of our strategy within the statistical office to develop also an expert. In terms of expert on biodiversity, we have a full-time staff to develop this that will also link to the various activities to develop the biodiversity accounts. And most importantly, we need to assess this data. We need better data. Right now, most of this data in terms of populating the biodiversity framework or these indicators are mostly administrative-based data. So the key messages here, one is, on the next slide, we have yet to advance. No? When do we exactly fully implement the biodiversity framework? So we need to advance yet in terms of the standard concepts, definitions, classifications, and methodologies. And also in terms of addressing the regular reporting of addressing the data gaps. So these are the things that we need to prioritize. And the technical capability of within the community, also the compilers, the producers, and the users. And we need to engage on our development partners for technical assistance. Yeah, I think this is my last slide. And these are the things that we prepare for the moving towards by preparing ourselves for the implementation of the monitoring framework for biodiversity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vivian. And thank you also for keeping it short while we know it's quite a challenge because there is so much to say, but thank you very much for your perspective. Now we will go to Amanda Driver. She's Senior Biodiversity Policy Advisor from the South African National Biodiversity Institute. Is she with us?
Yes, I am.
Hello.
I'm here.
Hello, Mandy. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. So it's not to say that South Africa has a long experience in biodiversity monitoring. And we also know that you are currently looking at in using natural capital accounting to support the global biodiversity monitoring framework. And therefore we would be very interested in learning from you how you intend to compile these accounts, and also how the collaboration with the Statistics South Africa is working with the other players. So Mandy, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Anne. Yes, and for those who don't know, SANBI, my organization, is a government agency that falls under our Ministry of Environment. And these slides are going to help me keep on track because my mind is buzzing with lots of connections and other thoughts based on what everyone else has said. So SANBI's mandate includes monitoring and reporting on the state of biodiversity, and we do that through a national biodiversity assessment, which happens every 7 years or so. And that includes a red list of ecosystems assessment, and that assessment has played quite a key role in mainstreaming biodiversity concerns to a lot of wider audiences in the country over the years. And then more recently, we've been working with Statistics South Africa to develop ecosystem accounts as part of natural capital accounting. And Stats SA launched a new natural capital series in 2020. And in the land accounts, we focus mainly on intensively modified land cover classes, or one can also think of them as ecosystem types like cultivated areas and built up areas. And then in the terrestrial ecosystem accounts, we focused on the natural and semi-natural biomes. And by combining those two, we can see where natural ecosystems have been replaced by intensively modified ecosystems over time. And that, of course, is very useful for the proposed indicator 8.0.1 on different ecosystem types, and also useful for many of the other indicators where one wants to disaggregate results by ecosystem type. The second publication in this new series was Accounts for Protected Areas that have tracked the development of the protected area state over several decades and disaggregated them by type and by biome. And that is directly useful for indicator 3.0.1 for target 3. And then what we're moving towards is a suite of ecosystem asset accounts across all realms. So that will happen over the next few years. So perhaps this looks easy, perhaps not. But one of the key messages that I wanted to, my key message is there's years of foundational work that go into the final slide with the beautiful map and the graph. And one of those, there are two areas of investment. One of them is in foundational spatial data layers. And absolutely critical is the mapping and classifying of ecosystem types. That's happened over many years in South Africa. It aligns well with the global ecosystem typology. We can do a crosswalk, it's not a perfect fit. And then spatial assessment of ecological condition, and that has been done as part of the National Biodiversity Assessment. And the key message here is that it's often a painstaking process. It's an iterative process. So you've just got to start somewhere, and the initial map is going to be far from perfect, but that effort over time to improve and refine these spatial data layers is absolutely a worthwhile investment that pays dividends. Oh, and just one other point here. The global data sets, for instance, that our Geobone colleague talked about are often a really useful starting point. In our experience, refining and sense-making of those to develop agreed national data sets is absolutely critical as well. Right, and then what we're quite proud of is that our national ecosystem classification system has now been adopted a year ago by Statistics South Africa as a national statistical standard. So that's a really nice piece of institutional collaboration and mainstreaming. Okay, then the next critical area of investment is in working relationships. And our initial discussions between Stats SA and SANBI, I look back in my folders, go back to January 2013, so a long way. And what we found, and other people have also referred to this, is that the environment sector and the biodiversity sector and national statistical offices come at things from quite different angles and operate in quite different universes, actually, with different terminology, different jargon, different ways of approaching things. And it's taken a lot of patient conversation over many years to get to the point where we have the sort of deep working relationships that you need to get some of the intense technical work right that sits behind ecosystem accounts. We've worked with Stats SA's Environmental Economic Accounting Unit and the Geography section. Obviously, the exact institutional arrangements vary from country to country. And then kind of similar to that, the institutional mechanisms for that working relationship have taken time to emerge. So we didn't start by saying, let's set up these big institutional arrangements and task teams. We started with building the working relationships and let the institutional arrangements emerge. We now have a national coordination, an NCA coordination unit, and then that's quite a tight focused kind of engine room, and then a broader strategic advisory group that Stats SA convenes that includes other national departments like National Treasury and representatives from the presidency and a range of departments. And then a key message that I just wanted to end off on is for if there are any people from the environment ministries and biodiversity organizations in the audience, get to know your national statistical office. And the CBD monitoring framework provides a great kind of moment if you don't have those relationships to knock on some doors and find the right people to work with. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you very, very much, Mandy. I mean, very short, but very right to the point. And on your last point, I can only say that, you know, the global, the decision on the global biodiversity monitoring framework for the global biodiversity framework includes the setting up of an ad hoc expert group on indicators. And in the past, the Biodiversity Indicator Partnership, which was created to develop the set of indicators to track progress on the previous strategic plan, was in fact only composed from global organizations, and did not include statistical offices, or at least did not include the UN Statistical Division, which I found was a gap. So even at global level, I think that we get to know our counterparts better and work together, find places where we can work together. So thank you very much for this. And now I will give the last but not least word to Gillian Campbell, who works in the Secretariat. And so Gillian, could you say a few words about the way to improve the monitoring framework under the convention, and what it will also include in terms of capacity building and financing. Thank you, Gillian.
Thank you. So before I start, Francis is coming online, and so if you could maybe bring him back in after me, that would be great. So I'll start by saying capacity is a broad word. And so in the case of this question, I think I'm going to sort of break it down into three different buckets, which have definitely been highlighted by the previous speakers. And I mean, Vivian was really mentioning the need for interagency and broader collaboration. And I think that all of the areas of capacity require this sort of broader collaboration. So in terms of the first area of capacity that I think that we're going to need for building this biodiversity monitoring framework, the question really is, are we collecting the right underlying data? And this is what Cecilia focused her presentation on. We have remote sensing data, but do we have the ground truthing data? Do we have biodiversity observation data that allows us to really build a system that we can trust and that has high quality information? If you look at the GBIF, which is the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, where they're compiling all this different sort of underlying biodiversity observation data, what you see is that there is a high concentration of biodiversity observation data in certain places. And in some of the places, the remote areas where we actually have the highest biodiversity, we have the fewest number of records of species counts. And additionally, the types of species that we are collecting data on is very variable. So there's a long history of collecting information on birds, as that has been an interest of many people, and certain mammals, but we are missing a lot of the information that's needed to understand things like soil biodiversity. And so I think that this first area is, what is it that we need to measure? And are we collecting that basic underlying data? And this is determined, of course, by the policy needs. And then the second question that I would like to highlight is, are we able to turn the data that we are collecting into statistics, maps, and indicators that can be used by policymakers and that can be trusted? This is where Greg really, I think, focused when he was discussing is, how is this information brought together? How do statistical offices help the ministries of environment and form a partnership so that there is data sharing, that countries are able to make the best use of the information that they're collecting at the national level and combine it with global information, such as from remote sensing? And how do we make sure that, how do countries make sure that the information that's being produced can be consistently produced over time, so that if you produce a environment statistics census today, which was again Greg's point, that if you also produce an environment census in 10 years, you're capturing similar measures so that there's some comparability over time. And I think this is a key area where the biodiversity community needs to work with the statistical community to make sure there's systems put in place for this data sharing and compiling this information together to produce maps and statistics using standards. And the third area of capacity that I think we need, and I think this one is really important and we shouldn't forget, is do we actually have the capacity to use this data at the policy level? Do policymakers understand the information that's being produced? Are they aware of the information that's being produced? And do they trust the information that's being produced? And again, I think that the biodiversity community really does need to work with the statistical community on this. One of the things that Cecilia highlighted was the existence of some of these global data sets. But the trust in these is sometimes lacking at the national level. There is a lack of understanding of where the information came from and the models behind it. And so moving to a more nationalized systems where statistical offices and ministries of environment are at the heart of producing data, and that they play this role in outreach with the policy and decision makers in order to make sure that the type of information that's produced is what's needed and can be used and can be explained so that we build this trust and relationship. This is another key area where we need to build capacity. So as you can see, I mean, there are some big things that we're going to need to change if we want to have a system that works in the future. You know, 3 different big areas of building capacity. I don't think it's impossible though. I think that this is a good time, and we will have the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, which can hopefully set a stage for where we want to go and provide indicators that everyone can work towards together. And then we also, as a global group of concerned people, can work together to fill these capacity gaps. As a first step, I wanted to mention that under the GEF Early Action Grants, recipient countries will receive dedicated support for an initial assessment of the monitoring systems. This is part of the call in terms of the early action grants. And I think that this sets a stage for, you know, additional work under the GEF and with other donors in terms of making sure that biodiversity monitoring is a priority and that we're able to build these capacity across these areas. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you, Gillian. So now, if I understand, we will finish with Francis. Francis, are you connected? Francis?
I think I'm connected. Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Yeah,
so Francis,
sorry.
Yeah. So you are.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
You are the co-chair of the Open-Ended Working Group, and we heard Basil earlier on. You're also from Uganda, and we would really like to, if you could very quickly, because time is really flying, to share with us how countries like Uganda can build a monitoring framework at national level to track progress on the global biodiversity framework. What would be your perspective, and what is Uganda doing in this regard? So the floor is yours, Francis.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. Sorry, I just joined in now. I was called in to meet the minister. I thought the meeting would end around 1. It kept going on and going on, but now it ended and I had to switch to this meeting. So with respect to your question, I think I will go back to really, in the Ugandan case, the time when we reviewed our National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan after the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011-2020 was adopted. what we did at that time was to involve very many different expertise, because you see, with the biodiversity, you don't only have scientists. Even we brought in non-scientists. We brought in people who are lawyers. We brought in accountants. We brought in economists, because there's so many things that when you looked at the IHE targets, it was cutting across so many sectors. Mm-hmm. So that is the first thing we did, to bring on very many players during the review and updating of the NBSAP. Now, next then was setting of the indicators for each of those targets. We had domesticated the targets, the IHE targets, now to national level targets. The next question was, what were the indicators that we are going to use? And so those different institutions, those different stakeholders sat and gave us indicators that actually they were already collecting data on. We didn't have to put indicators for which you could not get data on, because then that means you will not be successful on reporting on that indicator. So the first thing that you have to do is to make sure that the indicator that you have actually agreed upon to report progress on a target is one where data is, and people are also collecting data on it, so that it is easier for you during the time of review, or if you're preparing your national report. That same institution will now be bringing you the information you need. So that was for us, I would call it the most important kind of innovation we had during the NBSAP review. And it has gone to date. We now, from that NBSAP review team, we now have got thematic areas with thematic teams. So if it is on terrestrial biodiversity, we have teams that work on that. If it is on aquatic ecosystem, we have teams that work on that, on protected areas and others. So we have got those teams. We now even know institutions that have what kind of data and how can one access it. So the next thing we did was to set up systems for sharing information. The National Clearinghouse Mechanism, we set it here in Uganda. And so from there, when you reach that CHM of Uganda, you can go to any of these institutions and get the data you may need from there. And then, of course, we had to revamp the National Biodiversity Data Bank, which basically collects data on biodiversity and shares with the other stakeholders. So that is like the main point where most of the data is. So we had to revamp, we had to make sure that the system up there in that institution was up and running. And so I would say, in the interest of time, that is basically what we did. But during before we actually had the national reporting, we had one very interesting example with support from the Belgian government, that we were supposed to look at one target and see how we could collect data on that target to influence policy. And we took the target level. Remember that one where we talk of 17% protected areas and then 30% marine, 10% marine ecosystem, 17% terrestrial ecosystem. Now, we found that the way that target was worded, a lot of data was needed, because well-connected, well-managed, equitable, but all those needed you to unpack and see how much data do you get from each one of those. So even when the post-2020, as much as the target will be written, but the data requirement of that target will have to be understood in practical terms at national level. So I think that's what I could share with you. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Francis, and very much appreciate that you could still make it. And now I want to thank again the whole panel, and I will give the floor to Bert. And Bert, I guess you will be upset with me because I didn't keep the time as I should have done, but yeah, that's all what I could do. So Bert, the floor is yours.
No, thank you. I'm not angry at all. It was a very interesting discussion and good contributions. And I think the central theme is cooperation. I like what you said in the beginning, that statisticians are very good at standards and measuring things and doing it in a very structured way, but need to be policy relevant. And so the cooperation with the biodiversity policy people and the statistician is incredibly important. Indeed, it's team sport. So what Anne, Mandy, and Greg said. And I like this phrase, get to know your local NSO. I think I'm going to use that in more own presentations too. well, we have to stop in 5 minutes. I want to give the floor to Stefan, but maybe we can have a few questions that were raised. I promise that all the other questions that will not be answered in this meeting will be answered on the website. UNSC will find some way to do that. But first question, I think I should ask you to maybe to Gillian or Anne, maybe Gillian first, maybe Anne can add, is by Joachim Spangenberg, which is, well, it's good to link levels, but how to enhance policy relevance in the process. So how do you keep sure that what we end up is really policy relevant and not only statistically sound? That's at least how I interpret the question. Gillian?
I mean, I mentioned, I think this is exactly what we're trying to do in the defining the indicators for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We're following a similar process to the SDG indicators process. And I think that this is a good model. You know, you have a global agreement on where do we want to go, which is what the SDGs also represent. And what are the targets and what is it that we're trying to accomplish in terms of global development, or in this case, global biodiversity conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. So where do we want to go? And then once that's agreed, then I think this is where the statistical community and other technical experts, like the people on this call today, can come in and say, okay, well, we see what it is that are these top priorities in terms of development or biodiversity. How can we make sure that information is available for these different topics? And so this requires, of course, coordination across the different communities, you know, with the people who are developing these different targets to say, is this really, you know, is this really going to answer your question? And then the second part is this something we can really provide so that you'll have this data that links back to the global target or the national target that you've set? And then how do we actually make sure that this happens? And so I think, as I said, you know, again, it requires cooperation and it requires really conversations with those people who are developing these targets to make sure that the answers that are going to be provided are to the question that's being asked. Thanks, Bert. Okay,
and you've got anything to add to that?
Yes, I think that's the beauty of the SIA work, at least from as far as I'm concerned, because at least it provides an harmonized matrix that can be applied differently at different level and answer, you know, the same questions differently. So for instance, for us, for the European Union, we want to improve the condition of all ecosystems, being natural or being heavily modified, but so that they can deliver multiple ecosystem services, and therefore there is a societal objective behind. Now, what it will mean in practice for the European Union will be different, very different from what it will mean for a biodiverse country, because we'll have a lot of work to do in terms of rewilding, you know, recreating ecosystems which have disappeared for a long time. But the ultimate objective is the same. You know, we want a healthy planet, we want a healthy environment so that our socio-economic system can continue. So the beauty to me is that statisticians can bring to the biodiversity community is to stop the endless discussions about what is a degraded ecosystem in Brazil or in Belgium. I mean, it will vary a lot, but if you have a metric that everybody can apply in the same way, then as Greg was saying, it will lead to policy relevant decisions in each country. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. And exactly the role that we want to play as statistician and to well define these data in a neutral way, comparable over time and over countries. So thank you. Next question. Application of SIA ecosystem accounting to measure progress towards target 9 requires a disaggregation of information to look at benefits from the use of wild species, what benefits is likely to include in globally produced data sets, and how robust and accurate do you expect such global assessments to be, from Elia Wooden. So what I myself could answer is that, well, these indicators could be informed by ecosystem services accounting, by looking at ecosystem services like wild biomass provisioning services, pollination, especially habitat maintenance services. And the accounting frameworks allows you not only to look at the provisioning services, but also the parts of the economy that benefit from these services. So what are they really, which part of the economy do they benefit? And the idea is to have national assessment for this kind of indicator using national data sets, spatially explicit rather than global assessments. And obviously the accuracy will then depend on the national data. Maybe there are more ideas, but then we'll put it in the chat later on. I think it's 2:30. So I just give the floor to Stefan before closing the meeting. Stefan is director of UNSD, as probably all of you know. Stefan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bert, and thank you to all the participants for what was really a fascinating discussion of over an hour and a half. I learned a lot. I think the sense that I'm taking away, it was a little bit of, I was at one point almost smiling, and I was thinking it's a kind of like a dating game. I mean, two communities coming together, and I got a sense of a love fest. I mean, and I think one of the critical elements is the timing is so incredibly good at this moment. I really want to stress right at the beginning that we are all under a joint responsibility, because I have a sense of a unique opportunity what is happening right now here. Let me explain a little bit how I get this feeling. On the one hand, I heard, of course, from David and Basil and Ezekiel at the very beginning. Of course, we all knew already of the policy relevance of this topic of biodiversity, which is right up there with climate change and the SDGs. And even in our organization at the United Nations, the Secretary General is paying a lot of attention to these issues and has launched a discussion on GDP and beyond, and makes it very clear to us that, I mean, not only our economic development is relevant, but we need to have better measures of well-being and sustainability. And so the biodiversity community is in the process of developing these indicators. Indicators are important because it makes all of our agreements accountability frameworks. It's not only something that's written there on the wall and looks nice, but it is really a commitment for the national and the global level to look at each other, not to control each other, but to help each other understand each other, work together towards a common goal. And I also like at this point to emphasize that indicators are not only a policing action. Statisticians are not good policemen. Statisticians like to think of themselves more as an enabler. I mean, having information as we are going along is critically important for any framework that we have. But the biodiversity community, of course, cannot and does not want to do it all by itself. I mean, the indicators have to be well anchored in a much broader information system, because as soon as you have some indicators, very quickly you will look down and ask, well, how can I disaggregate that and have more information? Or you will look left and right and think, how is my information related to everything else in the system, interoperability, and so trade-offs, causalities with the economic systems, etc., etc. So I heard whole of government approach. I heard involving other stakeholders, civil society, academia, and private sector. And this is here we really meet with the statistics community. We are in exactly the same mood at this moment. We have gone through the SDG discussion. We have developed the SIA, and SIA were perhaps the pioneers of bringing different people together, because since the very beginning, this was a cooperative integration kind of exercise. And which are our big themes in the statistical community? Well, the first one is always data ownership. The Statistics Commission is very concerned that countries own their data. And that doesn't prevent us from being inspired by excellent global estimates, but they have to be taken to the country level. for the very simple reason, because data will not change anything at the country level if the country doesn't believe in the data in itself in the first place. So countries need to own the data. So that is a very fundamental UN principle. But we are talking a lot these days about data innovation using new data sources. And of course, our marriage with the geospatial information community has been a big theme for the last 10 years. Data integration, SIA again is perhaps the best example of that, to understand interrelationships between different policy domains. And also we have a big discussion at the Statistical Commission now on data stewardship, which is the new role of national statistical offices, that they are not responsible necessarily for producing all of the information, but they are responsible for guiding it and bringing it together, making from the different sources in the country, and make sure it is in line with international guidelines. And again, international guidelines are not a straitjacket. They help us to talk to each other, to take experiences from one place to another, to compare and aggregate. So this dimension of over time and over space consistency that we generate with our standards work is critically important, and many have mentioned that. So it is really a good moment to work together. It's very timely, but the stars are somehow aligned, but I don't only want to look at this year where we are putting the system together. Many have already looked beyond. It then becomes very quickly a question of implementation. We have our guidelines, your monitoring framework. We have heard from countries here, Philippines, South Africa, Canada, and Uganda, that a lot is happening in countries already. So let's build on that and go forward, because I mean, the proof is really then in having that information at the country level. And that will be our big challenge for the next couple of years. I'm looking forward to it, especially with the spirit that was generated at this meeting here today. So let me thank all of the participants. Let me thank the CBD Secretariat for being our partner, EU, and my own team. And let's all focus and help countries to keep it all together, as I always say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan. And I think this nicely concludes this meeting, this dating game, which indeed is a very good cooperation between the two societies that really want to work together and can help each other in achieve the goals. So this is not the start, not the end. This is an important point of time, and we'll continue to work together. So thank you all for participating. The recording will be at the website. The presentations will be shared. Also, I guess at least mine will be shared. And I wish you a good remainder of the day. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Take care of yourself.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Ciao, adios.